The snow didn't just preserve their bodies, it captured their final moments of sheer, incomprehensible panic. When rescuers reached that remote mountain pass, they found a campsite that defied every law of survival. The tent fabric wasn't torn by animals or weather. It was slashed from the inside out, as if something trapped within had to escape at any cost. Their sleeping bags were still warm when discovered, but the hikers had fled barefoot into sub-zero darkness. The official report mentions paradoxical undressing, a symptom of fatal hypothermia, where victims feel burning heat and strip their clothes. But that explanation ignores the deeper horror. Why did 9 experienced mountaineers simultaneously experience the same deadly delusion? And what did they see that made them choose certain death by exposure over whatever waited inside their shelter? This isn't just a tragedy. It's a crime scene where the only witness is the mountain itself, and it's keeping secrets buried in ice. But three died of injuries no avalanche could ever cause. The medical examiner's report would later describe fractures that suggested a pressure greater than any known natural force in those mountains. One victim's skull was fractured, not from a fall, but from a focused, concussive impact. The air in the tent that night must have carried the coppery, metallic scent of fresh blood, a stark contrast to the clean, pine-scented cold. This is the Dyatlov Pass incident. But what if the official story is a lie? The photographs flicker to life, showing 9 bright-eyed students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, their faces alight with anticipation for what they called a Category 3 hiking expedition. We see them checking maps under the weak winter sun, their breath visible in the air, fingers tracing a route deep into the northern Urals, a place known to locals as Kholat Shakhl, Dead Mountain. The air in these images feels crisp and promising, filled with the scent of pine and cold canvas, the sound of their laughter echoing off silent, snow-draped slopes. Their gear was robust. Skis, tents, heavy packs, every item meticulously chosen for a challenging but achievable journey into the wilderness. This was a group of experienced, fit mountaineers, led by Igor Dyatlov, a man whose confidence was etched into his smile. Nothing in these cheerful frames hints at the terror to come. The montage fades, leaving behind the ghost of their optimism, a stark and haunting contrast to the empty, frozen silence that would soon engulf their story. The room is thick with the scent of old paper and dust, each breath carrying the weight of history. Fingers trace the cold, brittle edges of a 1959 expedition photograph, feeling the decades-old chill seep into the skin. A low, steady whisper of wind outside mimics the nervous energy of those students preparing for their fateful journey. The metallic tang of anticipation hangs in the air, like the smell of snow before a storm. Every rustle of paper sounds like a footstep in the snow, each document a frozen moment from that January. A deep, unsettling quiet settles as we realize these 9 brilliant minds were walking towards something they couldn't comprehend. Igor's face was etched with grim determination, his jaw set tight as he scanned the endless white expanse before him. The only sound was the relentless howl of the polar wind, a constant, mournful cry that seemed to press in from all sides. A deep, instinctive unease settled in his gut, a weight that had nothing to do with the cold. Zina, the radio man, hunched over her equipment, her fingers moving with practiced precision over icy dials and switches. Her world was one of crackling static and faint distant signals, a fragile web of sound in the overwhelming silence. The metallic scent of the equipment mixed with the pervasive smell of cold canvas and frost, a sterile aroma that did little to calm her nerves. Lyudmila's bright orange sweater was the only defiant splash of color in the monochrome wilderness, a vibrant beacon against the oppressive gray of the sky and the deep, silent green of the pines. The wool of her sweater felt coarse and thick against the skin, a tactile anchor in a landscape that seemed to leach warmth and sound, leaving only the faint, damp scent of wet earth and pine resin. Rustem, the experienced guide, moved with a quiet, deliberate economy, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line, reading the forest floor like a map only he could decipher. His voice, when he spoke, was a low, steady rumble meant to instill calm, but the tension in his jaw and the way his hand never strayed far from his pack betrayed a deeper, unspoken vigilance. The rest of the group, Yuri, Alexander, Nikolai, Semyon, and Yuri Krivonishenko, were a cluster of shadows and muted tones, their collective breath forming faint clouds in the frigid air. A heavy, watchful stillness settled over them, broken only by the soft crunch of boots on frost and the distant, hollow knocking of a woodpecker that sounded eerily like a slow, measured tap on a door. John first noticed the subtle change in the air, a sharp, metallic scent like ozone after a lightning strike that made his nostrils flare involuntarily. Then came the sound. Not a sudden noise, but a persistent, wet scratching from somewhere deep in the walls, as if something were dragging itself through the insulation. Sarah felt it before she saw anything. A sudden, clammy dampness on her skin, as if the room's temperature had plummeted and left a sticky, cold film behind. Her breath hitched in her throat when she caught the faint, sickly sweet odor of decay wafting from a corner, mingling with the earlier metallic smell. Mike's muscles locked in place, a primal dread taking hold as he heard the whispering. Not words, but a low, guttural murmur that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. The sound was accompanied by a tactile wrongness, a gritty, abrasive texture under his fingertips as he brushed the wall, like dried salt or ancient residue. Emma's senses were overwhelmed by the thick, coppery smell of iron, so strong it coated her tongue, while a faint, rhythmic dripping echoed from an unseen source. She could feel the air grow heavy and dense, pressing in on her like a physical weight, making each shallow breath a laborious effort. The silence from the Ural Mountains wasn't just quiet. It was a profound, unnatural absence that seemed to swallow all life. Then, a faint, metallic scent like ozone after a storm drifted on the frigid air, carrying with it a whisper of something long buried. The cold seeped through their wool coats, a damp, clinging chill that felt less like winter and more like the touch of a deep, subterranean vault. Each step forward crunched into the snowpack, the sound oddly muffled, as if the ground itself was absorbing the noise. Their breath hitched, not just from the altitude, but from a growing, instinctual awareness that they were being watched from the ancient, silent woods. The telegram they awaited wasn't just a missed message. It was the first thread snapping in a tapestry of carefully laid plans, now beginning to unravel into the white void. The search party's footsteps crunched through the crusted snow, their heavy breathing forming plumes in the biting air. An unnatural stillness settled over the slope, broken only by the faint, persistent whistle of the wind through the trees. Then, a shape emerged. A slumped, snow-dusted form that was unmistakably a tent, its fabric sagging under the weight of the elements. The air grew thick with the metallic scent of cold iron and the faint, sickly sweetness of decay that clung to the back of the throat. Each step forward felt like wading through tar, a primal apprehension rooting their boots to the frozen ground. From within the silent shelter, a low, rhythmic scratching sound began to echo, like nails dragging slowly across the frozen nylon shell. The fabric of the tent was damp and strangely tacky to the touch, leaving a cold residue on their gloves that smelled of ozone and old soil. A hollow dread took hold, freezing the questions in their minds as they stood before the silent, waiting structure. The wind howled through the tent's shredded canvas, a low moan that seemed to carry whispers on its icy breath. Inside, the air held a sharp, metallic tang, the scent of cold steel mixed with something faintly organic, like wet wool left to rot. The tent's interior felt clammy and unnaturally still, the damp canvas brushing against skin with a sticky, lingering chill. Every item left behind, the stiff leather boots, the heavy coats, seemed to pulse with a silent, desperate urgency, as if frozen mid-flight. Outside, the sub-zero darkness swallowed everything, the only sound the crunch of snow underfoot growing fainter, then vanishing entirely. That moment of decision, to flee nearly naked into lethal cold, carried a weight that thickened the air, a primal choice between unknown terror and certain freezing. The chaotic stampede of footprints churned the earth, a frantic trail of panic and desperation leading into the forest's oppressive gloom. A heavy, earthy scent of wet rot and disturbed soil hung thick in the air, clinging to the searchers' clothes and skin with a damp, persistent chill. Then, the stark evidence photos flickered into view, their grainy, black and white stillness more unsettling than any loud noise could ever be. The shelter was a desperate, skeletal thing of lashed-together branches, whispering of a terror so profound it sought any cover, no matter how fragile. The quiet here was not empty, but watchful, a tangible pressure that seemed to listen back, broken only by the distant, irregular tap of moisture-hitting leaves. This was the moment the search shifted, the air growing dense with a realization that they were no longer following a story, but walking directly into its cold, silent heart. Beneath the sprawling canopy of an ancient cedar, the first two bodies were discovered, Yuri and Lyudmila. They were found in only their underclothes, their bare feet pale against the dark forest floor, having desperately tried to kindle a small fire pit that had failed to catch. The air here carried a faint, lingering scent of damp earth and cold, spent ashes, a smell of effort and failure. But the true horror was etched into the tree itself. For 10 feet up the massive trunk, the bark had been violently stripped away. The exposed wood was scored with deep, parallel grooves. Not the work of an animal, but the frantic, clawing marks of human fingernails, digging and scraping in utter terror. It was as if, in their final moments, barefoot and half-dressed, they were trying to climb the impossible or frantically escape something that hunted them on the ground. The camera panned slowly across the frozen ground, revealing the final 3 bodies, including Igor Dyatlov, sprawled between the cedar tree and the tent. Their final, agonizing movements are preserved in the ice, a silent testament to their last, futile attempt to return to shelter. The official inquest would later stamp its verdict on these 3. Death by hypothermia, a simple, tragic explanation. The mind wants to cling to it, to find solace in the known. But the scene itself whispers otherwise. The air here doesn't just feel cold, it feels thick, like frozen syrup, carrying the faint, metallic scent of old ice and something else. A dry, ozone tang that has no place in a winter forest. And if you listen past the howl of the wind, you could almost hear the phantom scrape of frozen canvas, the last sound they heard as the world turned to stone around them. The spring thaw peeled back the layers of winter, revealing the final 4 victims in a secluded ravine, buried under 12 feet of compacted snow. The screen fractures into a split view. One side shows a sterile medical diagram with precise anatomical labels, while the other displays shadowy, suggestive recreation shots that imply movement without revealing details. This is where the case fractures into competing narratives, where forensic certainty meets the unsettling ambiguity of what might have happened in those frozen moments. The air in the ravine carried the metallic scent of thawing earth, mixed with something faintly organic. Not quite decay, but the memory of life recently extinguished. Investigators would later describe the oppressive weight of that place, how the cold seemed to cling to their skin long after they'd left the ravine's confines. And in the background, always that sound, not the expected rush of meltwater, but the irregular drip, drip of moisture finding its way through layers of ice and soil. Lyudmila and Semyon were discovered in their small apartment, their bodies bearing internal devastation so severe it mirrored the aftermath of a high-speed collision. Yet upon examination, their skin was completely intact. No lacerations, no bruising, not even a single scratch to betray the violence that had occurred within. Their rib cages, which should have been shattered into splinters from such force, were found to be utterly pristine, not a single fracture marring the bone. The only evidence was a faint, coppery scent of blood that hung in the stagnant air, mixed with the damp, mildewy smell of the neglected room. It was as if an invisible, crushing weight had been applied directly to their cores, bypassing all external defenses to liquefy muscle and organ. This was not a wound inflicted by blade or bullet, but by pure, concentrated force. A pressure so immense, it turned their insides to pulp without leaving a trace on the outside. Lyudmila's mouth was a ragged, dark cavity where her tongue should have been, the edges of the wound looking cauterized as if by intense heat. The empty sockets where her eyes once were stared into nothingness. The surrounding skin pulled taut and discolored with a faint, sickly greenish hue. A sharp, metallic scent of ozone and something faintly like burnt hair hung in the air around her, a signature of violent energy discharge. Nikolai's skull had given way under immense, focused pressure, the fracture lines spiderwebbing out from a central, brutal point of impact. The texture of his hair and skin near the wound felt unnaturally brittle to the touch, flaking away like old, sun-bleached paper. But the most unsettling detail was their clothing. The fabric of their coats and trousers was not torn or bloodied in a conventional way. Instead, it bore subtle, almost beautiful patterns of discoloration, swirls of faded brown and gray, like shadows burned permanently into the weave by an invisible fire. And the Geiger counter placed beside them didn't just click. It chattered into a frantic, rising whine, screaming of contamination levels that had no business being on anything that was once human. The official inquest closed the case with a simple phrase: a compelling natural force. They called it an avalanche, a neat and tidy explanation meant to quiet the whispers. But seasoned alpinists, men who have felt the mountain's true breath, immediately raised their voices in dissent. They pointed out the fatal flaw in the official story. The slope simply wasn't steep enough to generate that kind of destructive power. And the tent told its own silent, damning story. It wasn't buried under tons of snow and debris, as an avalanche would demand. It was just left there, a pristine, untouched monument to a force that didn't follow the rules. So if it wasn't the mountain, what or who emptied that tent? The avalanche doesn't explain the internal injuries. We're not talking about broken bones from impact, but organs that look like they'd been pulverized from the inside out. The autopsies revealed a sickening, wet tearing sound that would have accompanied such catastrophic damage, a heavy, crushing sensation that had nothing to do with snow. The avalanche doesn't explain the radiation. Geiger counters didn't just click, they screamed, their needles pinned in the red zone near the bodies. That persistent, frantic clicking was the only sound in the otherwise dead air of the recovery tent. An invisible, prickling heat seemed to emanate from the victims, a wrongness you could feel on your skin. The avalanche doesn't explain the look of pure terror on their faces. Their eyes were wide, frozen in a moment of witnessing something utterly incomprehensible. You could almost hear the echo of a final, silent scream trapped in their rigid jaws. A profound, icy dread settled in the room, the kind that makes your own breath catch in your throat. Let's go back to that night. The screen had been filled with frantic theories, military experiments, cryptid encounters, strange frequencies, each dismissed with a decisive visual cross. Then, everything dissolved into pure, swallowing blackness, broken only by the weak, trembling circle of your flashlight. The air in the woods that night wasn't just cold, it was damp and clung to the skin like a second layer. Every snapped twig or rustle in the undergrowth wasn't just a sound, it was a physical pressure against your ears. And beneath the scent of pine and damp earth, there was something else. A faint, metallic tang, like old pennies, that made the back of your throat tighten. This is where the map ends, and the real story begins. Not with answers, but with the raw, paralyzing sensation of the unknown. You're Igor, not investigating from the outside, but experiencing this from within your own skin. Then, you hear it, not a rumble or a crash, but a sound that bypasses the ear and vibrates directly in the teeth. It's a low, resonant frequency, a hum that seems to emanate from the walls themselves, making the old floorboards tremble under your feet. The air grows thick and tastes of static, like licking a battery, while a cold dampness seeps through your clothes as if the room itself is sweating. Your breath hitches, caught in a chest that feels too tight, as a primal understanding coils in your gut. This isn't a sound you hear, it's a presence you feel. It's the frequency of something ancient and awake, and it's searching. The vibration began not as a sound, but as a deep, resonant hum that seemed to originate from within the marrow of your bones. It felt as if the very bedrock beneath you was being gently, insistently stroked by a colossal, unseen hand. Then, the air changed. It grew dense and viscous, pressing against your skin with a palpable, static charge that made the fine hairs on your arms stand on end. A sharp, metallic scent of ozone cut through the night, the same smell that lingers after a lightning strike. There was no storm. Your gaze was drawn upward, where over the jagged silhouettes of the peaks, lights began to dance. They were not stars, not aircraft. They were pulsing, self-contained spheres of a deep, luminous orange, moving with a silent, deliberate intelligence that defied the wind. A low, sub-audible drone seemed to emanate from them, a frequency that bypassed the ears and spoke directly to a primal, forgotten part of the brain. In that moment, a profound, instinctive dread took hold. A certainty that you were not just observing, but being observed by something profoundly ancient and utterly alien. The hikers' frantic movements cast monstrous, elongated shadows across the nylon walls, twisting and jerking in the flickering light. Their panicked whispers, sharp and clipped, were punctuated by the frantic rustle of gear and the wet, sucking sound of boots scrambling against the tent floor. The air inside grew thick and stale, laced with the sharp scent of cold sweat and the damp, earthy smell of disturbed soil from beneath the ground sheet. A sudden, profound stillness descended, broken only by the frantic, shallow rhythm of their own breathing and the faint, distant scratching of something against the tent's outer shell. The nylon fabric beside one hiker's head bulged inward slightly, as if pressed by an unseen weight, and a cold, damp chill seeped through the material where it touched. A low, guttural vibration, more felt in the bones than heard by the ears, began to resonate through the ground and up into their very spines. The orange glow behind the ridge pulsed like a sick, living heartbeat, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to reach toward the tent. The sound was no longer just a hum. It was a sub-bass vibration you felt in your teeth and bones, a a pressure that seemed to thicken the very air around you. Beneath that oppressive drone, you could make out whispers, not words, but fragmented sounds, distorted and layered, as if several voices were speaking from underwater. A sharp, metallic scent, like ozone after a lightning strike, mixed with the damp, earthy smell of the tent canvas, filled your nostrils. Your mind screamed a single, primal command: flee. Every muscle tensed, your heart hammering against your ribs like a trapped bird. Logic, gear, even boots were forgotten. Only the raw, animal instinct to escape that pulsating unknown remained. The knife tore through the nylon with a sickening rip, like splitting flesh, and I plunged into the minus 30 degrees Celsius void. The cold wasn't just a temperature. It was a physical blow that stole the air from my lungs and made my face feel like shattered glass. Because that cold was a known, quantifiable terror, a simple equation of flesh versus elements. It was a mercy compared to the presence we had awakened on that mountain, a wrongness that made the very air taste of ozone and old, frozen rot. My boots slipped on the ice-sheathed rock, the camera view pitching wildly as I ran, a frantic, stumbling flight fueled by pure animal instinct. Then a misstep, the world tilting, and the hard, frozen earth rushed up to meet me. Dazed, gasping air that felt like shards in my throat, I forced my head up, the camera lens pointing back up the slope I just fled. The orange light drifts closer, a silent, alien presence that defies the forest's natural darkness. Its movement is not a glide, but a slow, deliberate descent, like a predator zeroing in on its prey. The air around it grows thick and heavy, carrying the faint, acrid smell of ozone, like the aftermath of a lightning strike. From the campfire, Yuri and Lyudmila watch, frozen, the crackling of their fire now sounding impossibly loud and fragile against the encroaching silence. Igor, who had mustered the courage to turn back, now finds his muscles locked, a primal dread rooting him to the damp, leaf-littered ground. Then, with a final, weightless drop, the light touches down, and the very atmosphere seems to hum with a low, subsonic pressure. It wasn't a creature you could see or hear. It was a pressure, a force that builds in the air like a coming storm. It presses down on your chest with a weight that feels ancient and immense. A slow, crushing descent that makes each breath a struggle against collapse. The air grows thick and stale, carrying the faint, metallic scent of ozone and the cold, damp touch of a long-sealed tomb. And the scream, it's soundless, a vibration in the bones rather than the ears, a silent frequency that doesn't just startle you, it unmakes. It doesn't shatter or break things. It simply removes them. One moment, a memory is sharp, a photo is clear, a person is there. The next, there's just an absence, a perfect, chilling void where something once was, leaving only a hollow dread and the lingering smell of static in the air. The video opens with a disorienting collage of abstract, terrifying imagery. It feels like a fever dream, the kind that leaves a greasy residue of dread on your skin long after you've woken up. Then, a shadow passes over a face, not cast by any visible object, but moving with a sentient, liquid purpose. The air in the room grows thick and stale, carrying the faint, metallic tang of ozone, as if lightning had just struck nearby in perfect silence. A sudden, silent flash of light erupts, bleaching the world white and searing the afterimage of the room's contents onto your retinas. When vision returns, it's accompanied by a low, sub-auditory hum that vibrates in your teeth, and a deep, primal understanding that something fundamental has just been altered. A figure convulses in the snow, its movements not gory but deeply violating, a grotesque dance that defies nature. The sound is a wet, rhythmic tearing of fabric and flesh, punctuated by sharp, involuntary gasps that hang in the frozen air. A primal dread takes hold, a visceral understanding that what you're witnessing shouldn't be, a wrongness that seeps into the marrow of your bones. The last 4 survivors aren't buried by the avalanche. They are entombed by their own terror, hiding in the shadow of the ravine. Above them, they hear the final, choked cries of their friends, muffled, desperate sounds that are swiftly swallowed by the crushing weight of the snow. With numb, trembling fingers, they scrape at the packed ice, carving out a fragile pocket of safety that smells of cold earth and their own sharp, metallic fear. The air in their makeshift tomb grows heavy and stale, each shared breath a reminder of the immense, silent mountain pressing in from all sides. This was no shelter. It was a tomb, sealed by something ancient and hungry. The air carried the scent of wet earth and something metallic, like old coins left to tarnish in the damp. A low vibration began in the walls, a deep hum that traveled through the soles of their boots and up their legs. This force wasn't searching blindly. It moved with terrible purpose, drawn to the warmth of their living breath. Their trauma didn't come from the physical fall into this place, but from the realization that they'd descended into a predator's lair. The temperature dropped sharply, their exhales forming visible clouds that hung in the stagnant air before dissipating too slowly. Something whispered through the stone. Not words, but intentions. A cold intelligence that recognized their presence as intrusion. Their muscles locked, not from injury, but from a visceral understanding that movement would attract the attention they desperately needed to avoid. The radiation wasn't contamination from some forgotten test site, but a distinct signature, a fingerprint. A low, resonant hum permeated the air, vibrating through the floor and up into the bones, a tangible energy that felt both ancient and terribly new. The metallic scent of ozone mixed with the faint, sweet rot of decay, a cocktail that coated the back of the throat and promised nothing good. Every surface felt unnaturally cold to the touch, a deep, marrow-chilling cold that seemed to leach warmth directly from the skin. And the source, it's from the inside out. Not something that fell from the sky, but something that grew, that emerged, that was born here. A distant, wet scratching sound began, rhythmic and deliberate, as if something was patiently carving its way through stone from the other side. This was no accident. No spill. This was a deliberate emission, a beacon, or perhaps a warning. The air grew heavy, thick with a static charge that made the hairs on your arms stand on end, a palpable pressure of imminent revelation. The residue left by whatever touched them wasn't just a stain. It was a physical echo of the event, clinging to the fabric like a ghost's fingerprint. It shimmered under the lab lights with a faint, sickly luminescence, a color that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. The scent it gave off was faint but unmistakable. Ozone, like the air after a lightning strike, mixed with the dry, ancient smell of cold stone and something metallic, like old iron. To the touch, it was unnervingly cold, a damp, sticky chill that seemed to leach the warmth from your fingers long after contact was broken. And in the utter quiet of the lab, you could almost hear it, a nearly imperceptible, high-frequency hum, like the sound of a distant power line or the vibration of a tuning fork struck in another room. This wasn't mere contamination. It was a signature, a calling card left by a force that defied all known physics, a tangible piece of the impossible that refused to fade. His hands trembled as he turned the photograph over, revealing the back. Scrawled across it in a frantic, desperate hand were the words, "We never found all the film." The sentence hung in the air, a tangible confession of failure that carried the metallic scent of old fear. In response, the Soviet state imposed a total silence, sealing the files and the very land itself behind a wall of official secrecy. For years, the area remained a forbidden zone, a blank space on maps where the air grew thick and stagnant, smelling of damp earth and forgotten things. Yet through the decades, whispers persisted from those who dared venture near hikers who spoke of strange, silent lights drifting between the trees. These weren't the warm flickers of a campfire, but cold, clinical glows that cast no shadows and made the skin prickle with static. Their reports were always the same, an overwhelming sense of being watched by something that left no trace but a lingering, ozone sharpness in the air. The official reports are riddled with blacked-out lines, entire paragraphs erased from history. The silence of those redactions is a hollow, deliberate void, the sound of truth being smothered by ink. A cold, sterile scent of bureaucracy and old paper clings to those censored pages, a feeling of being deliberately walled out. The real terror of Dyatlov Pass isn't that the puzzle lacks a solution, it's that every piece we try to force into place feels wrong, jagged, and ill-fitting. A sticky, cloying dread settles in as we realize we're surrounded by answers, and each one is a door leading only to a deeper, darker question. They weren't running from an avalanche, or a military cover-up, or even a Yeti. Those are just comforting, familiar shapes, like a child seeing monsters in a closet that we desperately try to force onto a shadow that doesn't have one. The Mountain of the Dead holds a secret that defies our neat little boxes. It's something that doesn't want to be understood, something that recoils from the light of reason like a parasite from antiseptic. And that is the only explanation for why 9 rational, trained experts, geologists, survivalists would flee their only shelter into the killing cold. They chose certain frostbite, chose a slow, agonizing death by freezing, because in that moment, it was the better option. The black and white photo holds them in a moment of pure joy, their faces alight with anticipation for the adventure ahead. But the image begins to dissolve, the edges of their jackets, and the trees behind them melting away like mist. Soon, even their smiles vanish, leaving only their eyes, wide, bright windows that once held the light of the world. A faint scent of ozone and damp wool seems to seep from the fading print, the last tactile memory of their camp. Then those eyes, too, are swallowed by the encroaching darkness, as if pulled into a void they alone witnessed. The final silence is not empty, but thick with the echo of a question. What horror approached that made the mountain's frozen embrace seem a kindness? The question hangs in the air, thick and palpable, a ghost of a thought that refuses to dissipate. Was it ever truly gone? Or has it simply been dormant? A patient malignancy seeping into the foundations of this place? The air here is different now, carrying the faint, metallic scent of old pipes and the deeper, unsettling odor of damp earth and forgotten things. Every surface feels tacky to the touch, not with moisture, but with a strange, clinging residue that seems to absorb the warmth from your skin. And beneath the settling dust, a new sound emerges. Not a scratch or a whisper, but a slow, rhythmic pressure, like something immense shifting its weight in the dark. The mind recoils, not from a sudden shock, but from the dawning, glacial certainty that you are not the hunter here. You are the marked territory.